So I will introduce the in Spanish. Then Rick, Richard will ¿Cuál es mío? ¿Dónde Shai?
Make sure you tell them that it's okay to echo as long as they do it in English.
¿Estamos todos? Un minuto. No, sabes. Muchas gracias. Buenas noches con todos. Muchas gracias por venir. Esta es nuestra primera sesión de Sitecore User Group Ecuador del año. Ya con esta va a ser nuestra 12ª sesión. Esperemos que sea esta la primera del año y muchas más, ¿no? Quien quiera exponer siempre tiene los brazos abiertos y nos puede contactar a Richard o a mí para cualquier presentación que ustedes tengan, ¿no? Yo soy Santiago Morla, soy MVP, Sitecore MVP hace 4 años, y aquí conmigo está también Richard, que me acompaña para ser organizador de Sitecore Europe. Le voy a dejar a él que introduzca la sesión de
introducción en inglés para todos los que me hablan español. Hello everyone. For those of you who don't speak Spanish, Rick now speaks Spanish and he's going to be presenting in Spanish. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope there are a few folks out there watching this on YouTube. And today we have a very, very good speaker with us, a very experienced guy, Rick Cabral, aka Sergeant Sitecore. He has more than 15 years of experience working with Sitecore, and but I'll let him introduce himself. So, Rick, thank you for being here with us. And
Buenas noches. That's all you're going to get out of me. I tried to order coffee; it did not go well. Okay. Hi. If you are on Sitecore Slack, you can find me at Sergeant Sitecore. And if you look on Sitecore Stack Exchange, who uses that? Everyone, yeah. You can also find me at Sergeant Sitecore there. But I'm also known as Sitecore Rick, which is my call sign on Twitter. And like Richard said, I've been working with Sitecore since 2005. I was actually trained by John West. Does anyone know that name? Yeah. So I was probably like the third or fourth person in the United States that he trained. And they were still developing the training materials while we were being trained. So it was quite an experience. I am a Sitecore MVP. I'm proud to say that I have been a Sitecore MVP since 2010. And maybe that continues to 2020. We'll see. You know, in 15 years, I spent a lot of time training other Sitecore developers, building Sitecore teams, and making great Sitecore websites. I've also done a lot of rescue missions where, you know, we've had a broken installation or a client has come to us and has asked us to improve or redo somebody else's work. So there are a number of things that I see time and time again with Sitecore. And what's interesting to me is that even with the Helix and Habitat, everybody knows Helix and Habitat. Who's using Habitat today? Wrong answer. Nobody should be using Habitat. Okay. Who's using Helix today? Okay. Who's using SXA? Wrong answer. So just to put some context, it's another discussion. I'll be here next month for that one. No. Tonight's topic is not about SXA. It's about pure Sitecore development and MVC. I want to cover two topics. These are not the topics, actually. This is the result. It's about patterns, but not just about programming design patterns, but also about information architecture patterns in Sitecore that I have found that they make the platform do what it was designed to do, and they help content authors stay organized and stay friendly with the platform. And the other thing is they fully support everything that Sitecore can do. What I have found, what I'm going to show you today are the types of things that I see in successful Sitecore implementations, whether you work for Ferndale or Ocean or any of the hundreds of other Sitecore partners out there. If you have a successful Sitecore installation, I expect at least some of these concepts will be very familiar to you. And the interesting thing is, what I find is that today everyone wants to talk about, oh, let's go build something cool in XDB. Let's connect to XConnect. Let's do personalization. Let's worry about scaling Sitecore in the cloud. And we don't have a ton of people that want to talk about the art of a good installation anymore. Everyone's too obsessed with the experience. How many people hear that word too many times a day? Right. So today we're going to be very nerdy, and we're going to talk about, you know, the fundamentals. And like I said to Richard, feel free to heckle, because when I attend Sitecore user groups in New England, I am merciless. But just do it in English so I can understand what you're saying. And Santu's not allowed to translate. Okay. So, like I said, we're going to talk about information architecture, specifically how to set up your content tree for success. None of this should be very surprising. If it is, if you have a different way and you want to share it, or you have an opinion, please. I really like to talk to my audience. I don't just want to show you a bunch of slides. And then we're going to talk about programming design patterns that I find work really well with Sitecore. And then at the end, I'm going to show you a few implementations of these facts, and I'm going to give you some information on some open source software that I've developed with a lot of my friends here at Ferndale that take all of these practices and implement them and give you some ideas to how fast we can move with this technology. So, information architecture. When I say information architecture for Sitecore, I'm talking about how do you build your data templates, and how do you build your content tree. And I'm not going to read everything on this slide. If you want this slide, it will be up on the user group on Meetup afterwards. We'll put it up there for you. But these are the things that, when I'm designing the content tree, these show me that the person designing it is really paying attention to what Sitecore wants to be. We talk about semantics. We talk about data templates that represent a business object, like a product, or a biography, or a service, like a business service, or something that the company sells, or perhaps some fundamentally important thing like a department at a university. These are things that have a lot of facts associated with them, and the facts are all mandatory. The nice thing about having semantic content is it allows you to leverage content search very efficiently to get the items that you're looking for display. If you don't have semantic content, what I tend to see is items that have tons of fields, but not all the fields are mandatory. And when I see content searches, what I see is I see get me all the items where this field has this particular value or whatever. And there are two reasons to avoid that. The first is it makes searches very complex. And the second thing is it confuses the content author. They don't know why you gave them the right to build a thing. So semantic content types is really, really important. And they should be identified early on the process. And how many of you here are developers? Okay. Anybody information architects or user experience? No? Okay, well, they're not here, so I can talk about them. So what I'm going to say is that information architects and user experience developers, designers, do not necessarily think in these terms. How many of you, you receive a wireframe or a Photoshop document that says, this is this page, right? And go build it, right? Or sometimes, if you're lucky, you get, there are these 20 components. Here you go build them. But not necessarily is it described to you why the components have to be on that page, if they're optional or whatever. Semantic content types allows you to go back to your designer and say, all right, this is a faculty bio page. What components have to be on the page for the user to understand that that is the purpose? And so the idea of identifying the business objects up front allows you to have a better, more mature conversation with the user experience team, and allows you to build a Sitecore interface that does only what you want it to do and not whatever the author tries to do. So it's a measure of success. Context and reuse. Everyone is building modular page designs, and they're using Experience Editor on every project they're doing. Yes, right? Not everyone. New work. Let's talk about new work. Right? If you had to do a Sitecore 9x installation tomorrow, you would be designing for Experience Editor first, right? Okay. No hands. That bothers me. What's hands? Especially for my team. Okay. So we all know that all CMSs now are modular. Add this to the table, subtract this, add 2 columns, add 3 columns, fill the columns up, move this over here. I don't want this. Make it red, make it blue. This one has a background image, this one doesn't. That's table stakes now. Everyone needs to do that. However, when you look at Sitecore, you can end up with the idea that you have a pile of parts, like a bag of Legos, in one part of your content tree, and then you have your sitemap in another part of the content tree. And it's not obvious as a developer when you open up that content tree what belongs to what. Well, okay, maybe that's okay. Maybe you want maximum flexibility. But say you take something like something important, like 3 paragraphs about a product for a customer, a product definition, and you just store that as a fragment, right? But you don't explain to the content author that fragment for SEO purposes should only appear on 1 page, because if you put it on 2 pages, Google counts it as the same page and it deducts from your search engine. So you need to be able to take your content tree design, and you need to be able to say, this content is only meant for this page and it must appear on this page. This content is an optional component that you can add to this page, but it only applies to this page because it is in the context of this page and just that. This piece of content over here is an advertisement, and it is meant to appear on every landing page of my site because this is what I want my customers to buy right now. So when we're looking at content, there are 2 types. There are content that is exclusive and there's content that is intended to be shared. And you see this again. How many of you have actually played with SXA? SXA has this concept built into it. How many of you have seen BrainJock Score at all? Well, BrainJock Score also has this concept. And in a minute, I'm going to show you a couple of examples to see how that works out. The last thing, of course, is, as I said, is Experience Editor. You need to be designing for Experience Editor first. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that when a user adds a rendering to the page, that it is obvious what kind of rendering they're adding. Is it exclusive? And if they're creating a page or they're adding a rendering, is the piece of content semantically significant? Is it a business object that needs to be carefully controlled and monitored? And these core concepts allow you to build a Sitecore installation that teaches the user how to use it correctly. That's really important. It's very easy to take a Jira ticket, for example, and take a screen snippet, build the HTML for it, put a data item that matches it, and throw it in the content tree and hope for the best. But you need to keep in mind how it's going to live in the system and interact with the system. So now we'll get to some demos. We'll talk about those later. I have some books for you guys too. Okay, so this is a very small website, and I'm actually going to put it in normal mode. Oh, no. No. No, no, no. Question mark. 2 beers is too many. Okay. So this is a very small website. It has about 60 pages in it. We have a home page that is set up with a series of modules. We have a list area. I hope this was working. This is running off my local, and I haven't rebuilt the indexes, so who knows what we're going to get. I have to tempt the demo gods. But we have a featured component, and then we have a list of related information that's coming out of the content tree. Very easy stuff to build. If we go through to one of these projects, right, we see a feature, some basic content, and then we see a number of components. And it might not be obvious from looking at this what is required on the page and what is optional. And it might not also be obvious just by looking at it here, unless you sit down and read it, and then it becomes a little bit straightforward. What is shared content versus what is mandatory content? But the content author needs to know what's going on. And so what we do is we organize the content tree in such a way that a project page, like Project Bishop, I'm just going to go grab that. There we go. The page has only the barest information that it needs to be successful. So we've got our SAO, we've got our feature information. All of this stuff is mandatory, and it's on the context item. That's one trick I would say first is foremost is if you have a page and there's mandatory content, don't store it as a data source for rendering. Store it on the context item for workflow reasons, right? Everyone's using workflow, right? Right? No questions yet. Nobody's saying I'm wrong. Everyone thinks I'm right. Is this boring? Okay.
How does that affect personalization?
The idea is if the content is fundamentally important to the URL, it is not content that you would want to personalize. Personalization should be used to get the user to do what you want them to do. And so chances are that you're going to find personalization used primarily on calls to action to direct them to a content page that is designed from the ground up to be what you want them to do. So the essentials on every page should be fairly static, and only the calls to action should get them where they want to go. And you can disagree with me if you want. So again, we have things like the heading, the release date, the copy, all the boring stuff is just right here. Mandatory has to be set up. How are we doing the optional components? Well, we're storing them as subcontent. In SXA, this is called data, if you've ever taken an SXA tree apart, but it has the same concept. And I've seen this concept at many, many vendors. They call it all sorts of different things. Sometimes they call it page fragments, or they use all kinds of words. But the idea is that these are data sources for renderings that appear on Project Bishop. And because they are stored near Project Bishop, the intuition is that they are unique to that page. Because if you think about it, if you wanted to set one of these as a data source, data source query for a rendering, it'd be very difficult to do. Because you have to say like, // star, / subcontent / blah, blah, where template type is, whatever. And it would be very expensive for you to be able to load data source options in Experience Editor. So that right there should be a sign that this content is not meant to be shared across pages. Well, what content is meant to be shared? Down here in widgets, we have folders named shared. Who knew? And so for shared footer, you can see that we have a content object here that, of course, ends up being this component down the bottom. And it is designed to be on many pages, and the data source for it is actually the default data source for this particular rendering. So by physically separating shared content from local content, from exclusive content, we make the system very easy to tell what's going on. It's also very easy to do A/B testing or to do personalization, because you can store the data sources for the personalization right near the page where they belong. A lot of times what I do see on systems is that there will be a folder like widgets at the root of a site. And so you'll see something like this, home and widgets. And when you open this, it contains all of the subcomponents for all of these. And from a developer standpoint, it's very frustrating because you don't know where this is used. And you don't know if the data is shared or not. So simply by having a convention of storing the local content there, you get a lot better intuition when you're opening your Sitecore site. You know what you're looking for. The other thing you get is pretty good performance, because when you're looking to associate data sources with your renderings, your data source queries are very short. Let me go pick up one of these. And yes, this is fairly helixy, not impossible. Let's go for our mastheads. So this up here is a masthead. It has breadcrumbs, which is related to the context. It has, some basic information. And we can see here that the mastheads don't have a data source template and they don't have a data source location. So if you're a developer and you see this, what should you assume about this particular rendering? Any idea? Right. It's a context rendering. So this rendering is only meant to be, it's probably mandatory on the page. It's probably there by default, and it's always going to read from the context item. If we go to, let's see, rows, how many of you here know Bootstrap, at least casually? Right? So everything is rows and columns. And I've found that regardless of whether or not you think Bootstrap is any good, the concept of rows and columns works remarkably well in Sitecore. So at Verndale, we have a fairly established convention that when you build a page one row at a time. And sometimes those rows are sub-layouts where you have individual columns, and sometimes if it's at full width, we just say the row is the rendering. So here you can see that we have a number of options for content on pages. And if we just look at something like alternating content, we'll see that it has data source location. The data source location is /subcontent. So immediately it's going to know where to put it. It's going to put it in the context of the page that you're editing. And then we have the specific data source template that, that is going to be created to do it. So it's very short and it does only what it's supposed to do. If we were to follow this alternating content link, I'm trying to find the best way to do that without trolling. Okay, we're going to do it the hard way. I want to go to that template. Yeah, well, I don't want to find where it's used. I want to actually go to the template itself. Project. Subcontent. And which subcontent is the keyword that we use for content that's exclusive to a page. I came up with that name about 3 or 4 years ago. I'm not in love with it. You saw that I use exclusive content when I talked about it today, and I'm waiting for someone to give me a pull request. But we'll see. So if we go to a full width, the content with background row, or what was it? What was it? Oh, I clicked on something. That was a mistake. It's only a laptop. I knew the demo guides would bite me. Here we go. Sub-content, alternating content. Okay. Where are you? Alternating content, right? So it has very few fields, just the heading and the subheading. It might actually inherit from something else. No, it doesn't. Standard template. So it has just the fields that are appropriate for that particular item. It's not meant to be bent. The thing about alternating content, as you can tell by the name, is that there may be different presentation options. So there may be a rendering where the content is on the right, maybe a rendering where the content is on the left, but you can use the same data source for it. How many of you are using the rendering variants? Yeah, it's really cool. A lot of times what I'll see developers try to do when a designer says, this is basically the same content, but I want to change the background color, or I want to swap what side it's on, what they'll do is they'll add a field, like we could do here, and they'll just say left, and then it'd be a checkbox. And, this was great before Experience Editor. The problem with doing this is that some of your presentation details is on the content, and so the content is no longer pure. It contains presentation. And we want to avoid that because there's actually a better way. If we look at Sitecore's Experience Editor, how many of you are putting thumbnails on all of your renderings, right? Because we have the idea of alternate renderings, we can actually show the content author visually what the page can look like, and basically push all the decision making away from them and just give them an inventory of available designs, which is it's very easy for the designer to understand too. We've let a lot of graphic designers into Sitecore, and they just go in and they reconstruct their pages exactly as they want because it's very visual, and that's really important. We want to take the switchology away from the content author so that almost all of the work that they do involves placing their cursor on the page and starting to type. Can't always do it, but we can do it a lot. I'm just going to leave this before I break it. I broke it. 2 beers is too many, Santi. So that's the key concepts for basic semantic content. And honestly, this is where Helix actually kind of gets it right. Helix says, you have tenants, you have sites have pages, and the pages have page fragments. And if you design an Experience Editor first, you should end up with something very similar to this. Is it surprising to anybody? No, good. So I want to move on to something that's probably a little bit more nerdy and fun, which is the developer side of the thing. But let me cover a couple of data smells. How many of you work on projects that you didn't build? Right. So, or how many of you are in charge of doing code reviews on someone else's work? Right? Oh, come on. There's more hands than that. I know. So, when you're doing your code reviews, these are the things that I want you to look for. Does everyone know what a code smell is? Yeah. So these are the things that are signs that maybe you need to go chat with your junior developer, and also things that you want to correct before you send it to QA. Not organized below a site node. This is standard helix. So sometimes you see, some site will be over here, some will be over here, some will be over here. You want to take care of that. Unique content not stored close to the page that it appears on. Giant folders full of modules without any subfolders. I've seen that too, where people use icons. Who loves icons? Right. Who's going to miss them in Horizon? Has anyone used Horizon yet? No. They took the icons away from us in Horizon. You didn't get that. So yeah, I'll open the tree and I'll see modules, and then I'll see atom bombs and guns and trucks and fish. And they don't mean anything, but they're supposed to tell the developer that this is a different content type from this. Use folders instead and organize your content so that it's close to where it needs to be. Generic templates. How many of you have looked at a template and it's got this many fields and you only need to fill out 2 of them for the page to work, right? That's another sign that probably you're overgeneralizing. And you should probably not either. If you're using a lot of template inheritance, you're using too much template inheritance. If you're not using any template inheritance, maybe you want to start. But it's a sign that you're not following semantic rules. Everything should be as simple as possible. And you should force the content author to change templates if they don't have the right facts available to them, because it probably means they made the wrong choice the first time they created the page. Lots of optional figures, and renderings that change behavior based on data, like the rendering that I just saved. You want to try to avoid that. That also, if you think about it, number 6 is kind of interesting because it has an impact on your code, on your coding too, right? How many people have views that are 2,000, 3,000 lines long, right? You don't want to do that. Or controllers that are a couple hundred lines long. No, you don't want to do that either, right? It should be take the item, turn it into a view model, throw it to the view. The view has a handful of HTML and some rendering field stuff on it, and it walks away. That's what you want to do. And Sitecore wants you to do it that way too. Okay. So now we're going to go on to design patterns. Has anyone here read the Gang of Four book or know about it? Yeah, really? Wow. I haven't read it.
No, I haven't read it too, but I have.
I was looking for the book that I read that was a book about the Gang of Four book, and it basically said there's only 4 patterns that mattered, and these are them, and you don't need to know anything else. And it was an amazing book. I can't find it in my library. So when we're looking at software design patterns for Sitecore, we're looking at predictability, performance, and reuse. What we want to do is we want to separate our concerns, make sure that every object in the Sitecore presentation stack, and I'm talking most about the presentation stack, but we'll see in a minute, there's places where thinking outside that actually gives you more options. But knowing where things need to happen so that you know where to look when a bug happens right away. And it shouldn't matter who wrote it. You should just know. If you see a 500 error, one line should tell you exactly why you're having a problem and exactly where to fix it. Performance. Who here is using output caching? Okay, everybody better be, right? Who here uses the Sitecore item cache? Ooh. Who here has used the ASP.NET data cache for Sitecore objects? Really? Come on. Even I've done it, right? So one of the things that I've found is when we look at the object, the design pattern I'm going to show you, using this design pattern reduces the amount of places that you have to deal with caching because it gives Sitecore the opportunity to handle the caching internally. How many of you know that Sitecore caches XPath queries? All right. What about content search? Right. What about Solar? Did you know that Solar caches the queries? Right. So the point being, if your code is organized properly, all the performance should be handled by the underlying technology, and you shouldn't have to worry about it. And then reuse. If your if you're using the correct design pattern, it's very easy when a customer comes to you and say, oh yeah, you know that site you built last month? We got another one. We want it to look just like it, only everything's blue now, right? How many of you had a conversation like that with a content author? Yeah, all the time. It happens. And depending upon how good your code is, if all of your data access is in the views, you're having a bad day. But if you're using this design pattern, you can say yes. And I know, Rich, you've used this quite effectively to build 3 sites at the same time in a very short time frame. It's really handy if you have a multi-site installation. So let's talk about our design patterns. I'm not going to use the whiteboard because no one can see it in the dark. So I thoughtfully drew it out for you. Okay. Who here knows model view, right? What about model view models, right? And repository pattern, right? Easy peasy. The Sitecore, a little blurry, but I've added the Sitecore item because it's very important. It's a first-class citizen in anything you're doing. We have our standard view, model, controller. We added a repository. And the important thing here is to realize that we're managing item access through the repository. We are isolating Sitecore from our presentation stack. We have a dedicated view model that gives the view exactly what it needs, nothing more, nothing less. And then we have our controller, which acts as the broker between Sitecore data access and the view. The benefits of this are that you can take all of your Sitecore data access problems and you can encapsulate them in well-named locations. So they become very easy to reuse and become very easy to troubleshoot. Your controller becomes where you set your context, right? So Sitecore context item. Who's still using that? Good. How about Sitecore context? How about Sitecore rendering context current site? Everyone using that? Current site? Yeah. No, you haven't because it doesn't exist.
That's how you get the site.
Yeah, so rendering context current, actually the one context fact that it doesn't have is site. You can only get the context site by calling Sitecore context. It's an annoying little Sitecore API thing. So that's the controller is the only place where you should ever see Sitecore context anything. And its job is to figure out, like, inquire the rendering context item, figure out where your data source is, figure out what view is supposed to load, figure out your security context, and then if you're going to go query something, go hand it off to the repository and query it and pull all that. Sounds pretty basic. This is a more exploded pattern. So what we're doing here is we're making sure that nothing unpredictable can happen. One of the important takeaways is that your controller, because your controller is the only thing that's allowed to access Sitecore context, when you go to the repository to get your Sitecore items, you have to tell it what site are you on, what database are you on, what language are you on. Only the controller knows that for a fact. By doing this, you can guarantee that your data access routine, whether it's content search or whether it's XPath, or whether you're crawling the tree by going, children, child, whatever, or axes, any of those, that this is going to be predictable and it's going to work for whatever database you hand it, whether you're in master, whether you're in some sort of preview database, whether you're in the web database. And if you're handling this context correctly, you can call your search index without having to go and name your search index. How many of you are using a string to say, I want the master index or I want the web index, and then you're using you don't have to do that. There's actually an API call in Sitecore for content search where you can pass it, the site, and it knows what based upon the context, exactly what search index you want automatically. So you're actually helping Sitecore work for you. But you have to know to keep that information separate. The other nice thing is sometimes when you're accessing a field, or when you have an item save event, or when you have an HTTP pipeline, you need to access this repository, and you don't have Sitecore context, or you don't have a site. But if the repository is always demanding these things of you before it does its job, then you are helping the developer down the road who liked your query code and wants to use it again. You're teaching them what is required of them in order to get the result that they want. And this solves so many problems around data access and unintentional misuse of a repository. Because they'll know right away, oh, this repository is definitely meant to be used by a view. It's not meant to be used in the item save event because it's asking me for things that I don't have access to. I don't have a site. I don't have an index. I don't have a database. What do? This must not be right. I have to write my own. It's just like with the content tree and the design of content tree, you're helping the authors understand where their content is supposed to be, and you're helping the developer after you understand why you did things. Using this pattern does the same thing. Now, this gives us some very interesting options. How many of you, how many of you is using controller renderings almost exclusively? Okay. How many of you are using view renderings? A lot of view renderings. Okay. So I prefer controller renderings because it gives me more control of what view I want to load. But if you use controller renderings, you have to know, your controller needs to know a lot about what's on disk. Because some point in time, you have to pass the controller the path to your view. What if you could follow the MVC best practice and do convention over configuration? And you could tell your controller, based upon the rendering definition that you're in, this is the view you want to load. I'm gonna show you the code for that in a minute. This means that now you can take this controller and you can use it in multiple rendering definitions. And because the rendering definition is what tells the controller where to get the view, you now have the ability to have alternate presentation without writing any more code than the differences in the HTML of the view, which is a huge leg up if you're doing multi-site, or if you have designers that like to have a red one, a blue one, a left one, a right one, a bottom one, a top one. It's incredibly handy. Separating your Sitecore items and item access from the model that you hand in your view is also incredibly handy. What I've seen is if you let a junior developer at a project where you're using something like this, sometimes I'll find a view model that has a new property that I didn't put there. And that property is parent item. Okay. How did it get that property? Well, when you go to the getter, it says Sitecore context database dot context item dot parent. Okay, you just broke a whole bunch of rules because they didn't know. But if the view model doesn't look like a content item and it doesn't have any access to the Sitecore namespace, it becomes very hard for the developer to start that process without going, oh, no, this doesn't feel right. It also makes it incredibly easy for you to do a code review because you just type Sitecore dot and you look for your view models. And if you see Sitecore in a view model, you know you've got them and you got to do it. In here, you'll see that I've separated out the repository, which is where you get your Sitecore items that you want to render, from Model Builder. I apologize, this is probably easier to see if you're on the internet right now. And there are times when you need to process, say, a lot of related items, and the model that the view needs is an accumulation of a lot of different facts. And so I don't want you to feel that the repository has to do all the heavy lifting. Sometimes it's actually really good to take the data out of Sitecore and then process it somewhere else. And when you're doing heavy processing and you find out that your view is a poor performer, a lot of times it's that processing that gets in the way, or the fact that you have to do 5 or 6 queries to get the data that you want. The model builder is a great opportunity for data side caching. Because it might be, say you're doing a blog roll for like 20 or 30 different tags all at the same time. And that's very expensive to get. Whoa. That's cool. by doing the work once and then caching the model based upon the input parameters, you now have a very high-performing web page, even before you get to output caching. And this is especially important when you're doing content search, or if you're integrating your items with, say, a third-party system. So say once you get all your items, you then have to hit a PIM and decorate it with further information. Having the ability to build a model that the view needs and not having to go back to the two subsystems is really handy. And it makes more sense to the developer than leaning on just the output cache, because you might not have access to the output cache. If you're doing a lot of JSON calls, for example, that you may not be able to use Sitecore's output cache. It may not give you the truth. So that's why that's here. It's an option. And it's probably one of the few places where I would start thinking about optimization, but not until I had demonstrated that I could not get the performance where I want. Let's take a look at some very small examples. Rich, you have any good class for me to go for?
Not really.
No? He's shy. Let's see. Is example site? Not impossible. Okay, we'll go for not impossible. Okay, project cards. This is a good one. So when we looked at our project list here, and we go back up to projects, this card setup is, it's a list of projects, and they're organized by certain tags and keywords. So what we have is, actually, let me go into Sitecore and go get it. Renderings. I'm going to guess navigation. Oh, I'm wrong. Liz, where is this? I'm looking for the project list. It might be context content, huh? Okay, let's go look at media. Let's go look at media. Yeah, same sort of thing. Oh yeah, here we can use keywords. So this is a little bit more sophisticated, where we can view all these projects, awards, podcasts. These are all keywords that organize all the media, and media are full pages. And again, they're very short because they're mostly about playing these lovely videos. These are feet. So if we go and we look at the media list page, gallery list, yay. We see it's a controller's JSON endpoint, area is not impossible, but the JSON gallery list is what we're interested in. Notice, so this one's a little trickier because what we're doing here is we have a page that renders a JavaScript that then makes a JSON call back to Sitecore to get the results so that we can do all the fancy stuff with it, like the sliders. That doesn't mean we're not using the model view controller setup. What we have is, we have the JSON is actually just a document. It's just a layout. How many of you are using device? Have used devices in Sitecore recently? Right. What we're doing here is we're going to go get the media cards out of the repository. It's basically a very simple indexable search item. And then we're going to have a controller. Oh boy, I need to start simpler, huh? 2 beers is too many. So. Help me, I can't find it. Here we go. I'm still looking for the media one, but it's a JSON call. Let's do this. Let's go context content. No, too simple. See, we should have stuck with SETF. It's easier. Let's do help. Can we do help?
Help center?
Yeah, help center. That's pretty boring, right?
Yeah.
Does it have a repository?
It does.
It does. Okay, so we'll do that one. Okay. So this is a totally different site, but here we have a very simple thing where we have a help center landing page that has a list of the categories, which are pages underneath it. If we click on one, we then will get a list of all the sub-content that, again, all the sub-pages that are on it. So this is a very standard sort of catalog page, right? And if we go and we look at how it's constructed, we have a feature, Helix feature, that has a controller for categories. And we have the ability to filter the categories, and we have the ability to deal with the results. But in all cases, what we're doing is no, we don't have a repository. You lied to me.
No, it does. The question one. I didn't build this,
Popular questions? No. No.
I did just go to vehicle information.
Okay, vehicle information. Help. Feature. Vehicle information.
Then, we know that one, vehicle safety.
Got it. Is this legible? Do I need to make it bigger? Yeah, you can't read it. 150? That better? Too big. Okay, you want to talk through it?
Well, yeah. Here we have. So, for instance, on GenApp, we heavily rely on user data. So that's where we're using this repository pattern to get some user data, basically. And that's we are using DI.
So the constructor here has our authenticated user repository, and
we can do that because of the. So if you go to that repository, you'll see that. Just that one. Yeah, it's pretty simple, right? Because we're just inheriting from our repository. So yeah, but basically the methods we're using are pretty basic.
And for authenticated user repository, where did it go? Oh my God. Add vehicle, right? But does this one use the view resolver? It does. Yeah. So if you look at what the controller is being asked for with DI, we're asking for a view path resolver. So we don't have any strings in the system. We're asking for a model mapper. How many of you are using Glass? Okay, yeah, or do you use Glass? So model mapper is a competing technology, but it works basically the same. It takes a Sitecore item and it turns it into a POCO. And we're just asking, we're asking for all the subcomponents that are required to establish the context for the index. And then on the index, we basically just put it all together. We say, repository, give me what I need. Model mapper, give me what I need. And then view resolver, give me what I need, and send it. So even though there's a tremendous amount of work going on here, because the authenticated user repository is actually talking to MuleSoft over there, it's talking to an SSO system over there, it's talking to a backend system over there behind a bank, and all this stuff is just abstracted out and is reusable. This particular Sitecore installation has 3 sites for 3 different car companies, and the users would never know that it's running on the same system. But because we're able to separate it out and separate the controllers from the views and able to keep the functionality up in the feature level, we're able to very quickly just reskin this and reuse it. And when something breaks, you know exactly where it's breaking. You know, if you get an error about user authentication, you know immediately to go to the MuleSoft repository because that broke. If If you're getting a 404, you know that you probably forgot to publish the item because the model mapping didn't work. It's very easy to figure out what's going on. And you don't have to worry about the view at all. How is that happening? What we're doing is we're leaning on nope, I want to go to layout. We have a couple of shims that look at vehicle settings. Yeah. That look at the rendering at Vehicle Wizard. Cool. So what we're doing is we're saying, all right, we know what the controller is. We know what the area is. We know what the placeholder is. There's no place here to set the view. How many of you use rendering parameters or have used them in the past? Yeah. How many hate them? Yeah. I love MVC and I love MVC and Sitecore, but I hated the fact that I had to key in the controller every time and I had to key in the view every time. What happens if I take this rendering and I delete this and I save it? Well, Rick, you just broke it. No, I didn't, because we have two tricks. The first is in the rendering pipeline. When the rendering pipeline runs across this rendering definition, it looks at this word, it turns it into a C# class, and it attempts to load a controller with that name. So now I've saved you the trouble of having to specify the controller. Well, what about the view? How do I get the view? Well, if I look at the path here, I can see that what if I had an add vehicle wizard.cshtml, which is what you would call it. And what folder would you put it in? You'd probably put it in the vehicle information folder. Okay. And if we go up a few notches, you can see, well, what site does it belong on? It belongs on the SETF site, and this is a project level component. So what we did was we built a view resolver that puts the tree together to get you a view path automatically. And it's sensitive to the idea of feature, foundation, or project. So if I take this add vehicle wizard and I move it to Mitsubishi credit, vehicle information, add vehicle wizard, it's the same path except for the Mitsubishi credit part. If we look at the project, we'll see that what we've done to separate these views is we've established that every site has its own area. And if we look in SETF, for example, and we go to views and we go to vehicle information, we will see that there is an add vehicle wizard. So by moving this into Sitecore and having Sitecore do it for us, we're cutting down on the amount of facts that you as a developer have to remember to get right. It also allows you to take a rendering and copy it and just change the name of the rendering slightly. So you could have Jumbotron left align text and Jumbotron right align text. And all you have to do is have two different views. You can specify the controller name as Jumbotron controller, and the controller will run for both of those views, will generate the correct model for both of those views, but you'll get different output because each one of those rendering definitions represents a different view on disk. And that is how you can handle rendering differences in presentation, but also how you can recycle a lot of your feature level logic to produce multi-site extremely quickly. When we built this, we knew that each one of these different sites on this installation was going to have the possibility of different markup. And what's funny is when we signed the contract with the customer said these will all be exactly the same but for color. 6 months in, that changed. What did we have to change? We didn't have to go back and do different rendering definitions. We didn't have to create new controllers. We didn't have to create new features. All we had to do was go to the view where the HTML was changed and change the HTML, and we're done. So it's very easy for us to adapt to changing marketing needs. And the client wants another site on this with yet more markup. We could literally take this SETF folder, Control-C, Control-V. Everything will work right away, and then when we get the markup, we just put the new markup in and the new CSS, and we're good. So it's very easy if you have a client with a lot of sites that are very similar to do a lot of work for not a lot of money. The other cool thing you can do, because it's all relying on paths and renderings, is if I want to get a new project in here, all I have to do is duplicate. And now I have all of my rendering definitions for my brand new site. The only thing I have to do is go to my templates, to my standard values, and reconfigure the presentation details on my standard values. And you're done. You just created a new site in about 10 minutes. And you're just waiting for markup. So that's only possible if you obey the strength of this design pattern. And you really lean on the fact that you have to keep everything separate. Let's talk about some code smells. I talked about some of these already. Sitecore context, anywhere but inside a controller. Rendering context. References to database or content search outside of a repository. Model transformation in views, and that's where, you know, they're either taking some. What I see is sometimes people will build a model that has an item ID, and then in the view they'll use the item ID to go get something else. That's a bad idea. So you want to look for that. It's actually a good point. Is when you're looking at your models, let me look at like the vehicle the vehicle controller. Add vehicle wizard. Go to definition. This is a very long model, but it's extremely simple. It's basically a POCO. Now, the thing that the model mapping class that we're doing that you don't get with Glass is this HTML string is actually calling field renderer. So every single one of these is automatically ready to go for Experience Editor. Glass does it a little differently, so the syntax is different, but you can achieve basically the same thing. And this very simple model is, it requires almost no coding. You can build this in 5 or 10 minutes just by looking at a design and going, okay, I need a property for that, property for that, property for that, property for that. What I've found is that a lot of people, they will build the model first, and then they will use the model as a cheat sheet for building the data template. How many of you here know EpiServer? Okay, so EpiServer is model first. With this technology, you could almost do model first in Sitecore. The reason that I don't recommend it, and the reason that I'm not sure it's the best idea for Sitecore, is view models should be more about the view and less about the data template. There are times when you want to take 2 or more items in Sitecore and smash them together to make one view model. And conversely, you might have a view model that is bigger than the presentation. So I'm not advocating for that, but you can see how entity framework and became and model first design is such a compelling thing with ASP.NET model in MVC. There's no data access here. There's no logic in the model at all, and that's something that you really want to pay attention to. As soon as you start to see logic or methods in here, you know that you're going astray. I missed the one point I wanted to make. Notice that there's nothing Sitecore-ish in here. There's no item. There's no item ID. There's no ID property. There's no template ID. There's no template name. These are all code smells that you want to look for. Because if someone is putting item facts in the model, chances are they are going to use that fact somewhere incorrectly downstream. That's going to cause problems later. Okay. So I put this back up. So we're looking at predictability, knowing where to look for everything, performance. If you're doing this right, output caching and Sitecore query caching will do so much of their legwork for you that you can get a really good performing site without a lot of work. And then reuse. You can see here that it allows you to take all the expensive logic and move it as far away from the presentation as you can, so that you can very quickly adapt it. And you can very quickly handle changing marketing conditions without having to say, oh, I got to build a whole new feature now. Let me start a new CS proj, and all the pain that comes with doing that. The design patterns that you've seen here, did not come easily to me. I do not have a computer science degree. I had to do a lot of reading on the job. These are three of my absolute favorite books about computer programming. The Pragmatic Programmer, who here has read that book or at least heard of it? Right. Okay. It's an amazing book. It's 20 years old and it's still relevant today. I would challenge any developer who has not read this book to read this book and not feel guilty after they read it. Because it really shows you what you need to be thinking about. Code Complete, who here knows, has read that book or heard of that book? How many people here know Jeff Atwood? Right? Yeah. So Jeff Atwood did not write Code Complete, but Jeff Atwood probably sold more copies of Code Complete than anybody else on the planet. This book is not as easy to read as the Pragmatic Programmer, and it's dated. But some of the things that I like about Code Complete is it teaches you as a programmer to think about the act of programming as more than just filling out the ticket, but actually how to make your code more legible and more consistent. Things like when you have a class that has multiple methods in it, make sure that if one method references another method, that the method that is doing the referencing doesn't have a lot of math in it. So it's like how to break down your code so that it's very easy to read and understand and reuse if necessary. He covers that in extensive detail. And then the third one, Extreme Programming Adventures in C#. Does anyone here remember Extreme Programming? Has anyone done it? No, because no one wants to pay for it. Who here has heard of Ron Jeffries? Okay, Ron Jeffries is a computer science god, right? He's right up there with the guy who invented C#. What's his name? Lars Hellsberg, right? Who also invented like Turbo Pascal, and now invented TypeScript. And invented most of .NET too. But Ron Jeffries is a big extreme programming fanatic, and I'm not saying that that's a good thing or a bad thing. But one of the things he is old. I mean, really old. Like he's in his 70s now. And if you want to be a better programmer, go watch somebody old program. An Extreme Programming Adventures in C# was written about 10 years ago, and it is the story of Ron Jeffries showing people how to do extreme programming without pair programming. He is just taking you through the process of taking a concept and turning it into software while at the same time learning C# and listening to his mental process of how he approaches stories and breaks those down into epics and tasks, and then also looks at what C# has to offer in order to help him achieve his goal and how he organizes his code. You really can't do better in terms of just getting some grandfather knowledge here, right? I mean, who here has a grandfather that tinkers, right? Or like is a woodworker, or knows somebody that is just an amazing artist and is a joy to watch because they're old and they've been doing it forever. This book was like that for me, and I highly recommend it. It's hard to find. It's out of print, but it's a great book. So I know it was a little rocky because I have like so many ideas to share with you and I only have a limited amount of time. But I would love to hear questions from you and let me be able to answer you in detail and maybe show you something if I can. If not, there's still beer out there, I think.
When you use like this design pattern, what difference between the model builder and the repository?
So there's places where okay. It's best to show you with a use case. Say you have a blog. This is going to come right out of a certain project that we've all been working on recently. You have a blog, and at the bottom of the blog page, there are 3 other recommended blog posts that you have to, that you want to display. And the content author has said, I don't want to do that manually. We have 3,000 blog posts. I'm going to tag all the blog posts, and I want the 3 blogs on the bottom to be relevant to the tag of the context blog post. So, but at the same time, I want to make the blog a infinite scroll experience. So if you think about this from a Sitecore perspective, what are you going to do? You're going to write some sort of context query that goes and gets all of the blog posts in chronological order. So that's job one. Then for each blog post, you're going to have to inspect the tag and then go ask content search for the top 3 blog posts that have that tag on, right? And you need to do that all at once so that you can create some sort of thing that's probably going to end up being a JSON object that you pass through JavaScript that does the infinite scroll. So that's a very expensive thing, because if you say you have, even you're going to limit it to 100 blog posts, it's 100 blog posts times 2 queries each, maybe. So it becomes expensive. And it'd be very hard to get all the information at once. So you're going to want to have something, you're going to want to separate the act of getting the blogs from getting the object that is eventually going to become JSON. You also might need, so when you're doing your content search, you might lean on the search result item. The problem is search result item does not serialize to JSON. So you might need to have some sort of conversion to slim down that item into something that is convertible to JSON. And that's where you use the model builder. Make sense? Mm-hmm.
Well, so you showed us how using this pattern, we create like a controller rendering. We don't have to specify like the controller name. When we come to a big project with a bunch of different components.
So for the record, that's a trick that's in Constellation, which it's open source library, which we'll put that in the slides too. So there's 2 things that's open source that I think are worth reading. And for those of you who are Verndale, I apologize because you know this already. But so what's out there is something called Constellation for Sitecore. It is about 20 NuGet packages that help you do this very quickly. And some of them are fundamental. They enforce the rules, and some of them are opinionated. They enforce things like the sub-content and the widgets parameters. And they're all optional. You can mix and match it. So I'm going to give you your URL for Constellation for Sitecore. And then there's another GitHub account called Zodiac. And Zodiac is actually an example implementation of this with Constellation. So, and it comes with an example site. So you can actually download it, install it, and run it, and see how everything plays together, and see how the model view controller thing works. So now that that's out of the way.
With that context. So in Constellation, like we create a controller rendering, and we don't need to specify actually the controller.
You don't. Yeah. The only time you do is if you're going to use the name of the rendering definition to represent the view. Yeah, for 2 views. Yeah.
So that process, of the controller lookup and the view lookup.
Yeah.
Do you think at some point, in a big project that will actually impact performance?
Well, here's the funny thing. What we're leaning on isn't Sitecore. We're actually using Microsoft MVC's built-in dependency injection to get the controller name. So all we're doing is, if you look at how Sitecore gets the controller from the controller name value, we're doing exactly the same thing. So it actually just calls the MVC get controller name. That's why it gets mad at you if you put the word controller in the field, and it would get mad at you if you name the item with the word controller at the end of it, and you get the same error, and that's an ASP.NET error. That's not even a Microsoft error. That's not even a Sitecore error. So it's very fast.
So I see you're using areas, Helix compatible.
Helix does not have an opinion about areas at all. The other thing I will say is Helix is a guideline. It is not law. If you go and you download Zodiac, you will see that it looks Helixy at first glance. But there are some things that if you really go into Helix principles, it violates the Helix principles. And it does not at all look like Habitat, which I think is a good thing. That's the important thing to know about Helix is it's a guideline. And the other thing is, how many of you here went to Symposium? Right? How many of you? So how many of you know that Sitecore wants to be a software as a service platform by next year? Okay. Is that news to anybody? Yeah. So here's the thing I have to say about Helix. When Sitecore becomes a cloud platform, our life is going to change radically. What I'm suggesting here is so close to stock MVC that it is more likely to port than if you were to follow Helix to the letter and all of your solutions were supposed to look like Habitat. So that's the thing I would caution you about, is make sure that your code looks as Microsoft as possible, because that's where the future is going to be. Because how many here have used GSS? Right? I would expect in the future that using Sitecore is going to be like using Sitecore on JSS, only Sitecore with MVC. And probably we're going to see at least the prototypes for that in a year or two. So this, I think, is more future-proof than towing the line on Helix. What time is it? Is it? You good? Oh boy, I kept you guys a long time. Okay.
So the Zodiac constellation, are you seeing that unit testing, or do you actually?
I would love to. One of the reasons that I've sort of developed this recommendation for a pattern is to cut down on the need for unit testing, because it's very seldom that I've seen that clients are willing to pay for it. Unit testing tends to be very expensive, and because Sitecore, as it stands now, still requires HTTP context to do so much of its work, it's very difficult to unit test Sitecore without it being a very complex system that you have to build and maintain separate from it. So one of the things you'll see when you look at Zodiac and Constellation is that the classes are all very small, and it's very easy to tell whether or not they're going to work. I will confess that I do launch with bugs, and I don't always test it as well as I should. But the idea was to make it very simple to read, and you can get the code on GitHub and do pull requests. And if you look at the NuGet packages for Constellation, you just go to NuGet and just type Constellation, and you'll see all of them. Look at the copyrights, and you'll see that Constellation is not Rick Cabral. Constellation is a large number of people, many of whom are sitting in this room. So it's a very well-maintained, very active code base that has 10 years of pedigree in it. Some of the tricks inside of it are 10 years old, and that includes this basic concept. This is battle tested. Well, thank you all for coming. I don't know if you guys wrap up. It's a pleasure to be here. It's very rare I'm in Quito. The food is wonderful. The views are amazing. Thank you for having me. Okay, you shut yours down first.